Hello, guys and gals, and this is part 8 of Album of Horses. In the last episode, part 7, we talked about the Shire and the Suffolk Punch, both draft horses, and we are starting to transition into different horses now. This is a book by Marguerite Henry and Wesley Dennis. This is a book from 15th printing is 1965, I believe. And let's see. We are going to get back into this, and we are to the Lipizzan. We talked about the Suffolk Punch at the end of the last episode. And we're going to look at this. I have seen the world-famous Lipizzan stallions, and they are awesome. Anyways, and now we are going to get started. It says, the Lipizzan is a powerfully built animal, yet he is the ballet dancer of the horse kingdom. To the old world music of gavotte and mazurkas, he performs the most difficult routines, springing along on his hind legs without touching ground with his front ones, pirouetting in delicate canter motion, leaping upward into space, and while in the air kicking out his hind feet, so perfect in his rhythm, one would think that he had a metronome for a heart. These leaping, thrusting movements are called courbes, caprioles, levades, ballotades. Spectators often forget the names, but they never forget the breathtaking moment when a Lipizzan turns himself into a flying white charger. Just a sec here. The leaping, thrusting movements. Oh, I already said that. Sorry, I lost my place. And I'm sorry if I butchered those. I can put these on screen here. Called courbes, caprioles. I know caprioles is spelled right. I mean, pronounced right. Levades, maybe, or levades, and ballotades, something like that. Anyways, it says, Lipizzaners are a very old and pure breed. They may be traced back to the year 1565 when Maximilian II, Emperor of Austria, decided that his kingdom needed a riding school like the ones he had visited in Spain. The horses trained in it would be beautiful to show in times of peace, and in war they could spring at the foot soldiers of an enemy until they fled in fear. Accordingly, Maximilian imported Arabian stallions into Austria and crossed them with Spanish mares. Their descendants became the dazzling white Lipizzaners, so named because they were foaled in the little town of Lipizzan near the Adriatic Sea. Maximilian commanded that only the stallions be allowed to attend his new Spanish riding school on the palace grounds of Vienna, and to this day the mares are never ridden. They and their foals live a life of freedom. Lipizzaner colts are a long time growing up. Thoroughbred and standardbred colts race in public meetings when they are 2 years old, but Lipizzaners run and frolic with their mothers for the first 4 years of their lives. A pasture dotted with brood mares and foals is a strange sight. The foals dark brown, and the mares milk white. Born dark, the youngsters gradually lighten in color, graying at 3 and becoming pure white by the time they are 10, until all the colty foolishness has gone out of them. The young Lipizzaners remain at the nursery. Then at 4, they are sent off to school to learn rhythm and manners and acrobatics. Their first lesson is with a lunge rope, round and round. Okay. We're going to look at these first. Okay. Round and round in a circle, the groom drives his pupil at the end of a long rein. Not until the horse is 5 years old does he feel a saddle on his back and a bit in his mouth. Then he is walked only, sometimes for months, but what a walk it is. Long, free, supple strides, neck reaching out, muscles relaxing, a rhythmic movement. At 6, the real training begins, the difficult ballet movements, one movement leading to another naturally, for the rider trainers are superb teachers. Their commands are spoken in low tones, their homemade birch whips are cues, not punishing rods, and always their pockets bulge with carrots for good behavior. When the rider sits his horse, when the rider sits his horse, he seems to have a ramrod for a backbone. The fact is that as an apprentice, he rode for days when an iron bar sewed into the back seam of his rider's coat. When the rider sits his horse, he seems to have a ramrod for a backbone. The fact is that as an apprentice, he rode for days with an iron bar sewed into the back seam of his riding coat. He appears to sit stone still, yet he is constantly giving signals. In the canter, for example, he sometimes asks his mount to change leads with every stride. If he wishes his horse to take a left lead, he brings back the calf of his right leg, but only a trace. He turns his horse's head towards the left, but only a hair's breadth. He shifts his weight into the right seat bone. He brings back his left shoulder, but all of these signals are so fine that only the horse is the wiser. Muscle control must be learned by the rider as well as the horse. Small wonder, then, that apprentice grooms start out when only 9 or 10 and are still learning at 65, even though they are masters. The young apprentice learns most from the fully trained horse, and the green horses from the experienced master. Then, all along the years, trainer and horse continue to learn from each other, growing wise together. As soon as the canter has become habit, and the stallions are ready for the quadrille, it's 2/4 time to the strains of a Mozart minuet. They are taught to dance in graceful maneuvers. From the quadrille, they graduate to the passage. This is a slow to medium trot, which looks as if the feet approach rather than touch earth. Diagonal legs strike out in unison, and the action of the foreleg is extremely high. The passage is not spectacular, rather it is slow, measured beauty. The piaffe next. Piaffe is the French word meaning to prance. The piaffe is just that, prancing in place, not in stiff movement like a toy soldier, but like a ballet dancer getting ready for an especially intricate routine. In the case of the Lipizzan, he is getting ready for the levade, the greatest test of a horse's balance. In this exercise, he crouches on his hind legs as if he were sitting on his haunches. Then slowly he rears until his body reaches a 45-degree angle, which is far more difficult than if it were held erect. Forelegs tucked under his belly, 1,000 pounds of weight poised. He becomes a white stone statue. The best stallions in the school can stand the strain of this pose for no longer than 15 seconds. Not all Lipizzans go further in their schooling. Only the very strong can do the balatade, which is a spectacular leap with the hind legs tucked under the belly. Or the capriole, in which the horse springs into the air and while he is at his highest elevation thrusts his hind legs out until he is a winged Pegasus come alive. Time and again, wars threatened to destroy the Spanish riding school. In the Second World War, the Nazis spirited the Lipizzan mares and foals away from Austria and hid them in Czechoslovakia. Meanwhile, at the school, Colonel Aloy Pajaski, chief riding master, tried to save his stallions, rationing their oats and hay, building air raid shelters for them, but even in the shelters, their safety was threatened, for the enemy was moving in closer and closer. Finally, the colonel loaded his pupils on freight cars, but could not get them out of the danger zone. Just when the future looked blackest, U.S. General George S. Patton, Jr. came to the rescue. As an expert horseman himself, he has to see the horses perform. So impressed was he that he wanted to save the breed for future generations. He furnished a convoy of armored tanks to bring the mares and foals back to Austria. And when he was killed, General Mark Clark saw to it that the stallions were escorted to the little town of Wels in the American zone of Austria. Here, on a peaceful grassy plain, the Spanish riding school still carries on. In October 1950, the same Colonel Podhatsky brought 14 of his star pupils to America to show the New World the finest horsemanship of the old. More than 100,000 people surged into Madison Square Garden in New York to see the exhibition of the white stallions. Applause came easily to Americans, but watching the marveled beauties at the spectacular routine of the Lipizzaners, the onlookers sat frozen in admiration. Never before had they seen a horse ballet. The quiet ovation had to come first. Then, like a dike of water unleashed, the applause burst forth. Before it died away, some horse fans thought, and some said, the stallions must have been severely handled, cruelly treated to perform so precisely. But how could the casual onlooker know, for the long, patient years of training, how could they know that the superb steps are not stunts, but that each graceful movement is a copy of high-spirited horses at play or in combat? And how could they possibly know that when the white stallions are turned out to grass, they take a busman's holiday, with no applause at all and no riders to cue them and no music but wind whispers? They sprang into a capriole just as boys and girls turn a cartwheel for the sheer joy it brings. And that was the Lipizzan. Now we are going to read about the Mustang. And we got some pictures here. Okay. He had never looked through a bridle and never slept in a stable, this half-wild horse of the western plains. His world is the wide-open range, the red desert, and the dark hidden folds of the mountains. His name, Mustang, is Spanish for running wild, and he is wild as a tornado, thundering over prairies, zigzagging through foothills, flying along canyon ledges, churning up yellow dust until he is lost in a cloud of his own making. Of all things in life, he values most his liberty, yet his forebears answered the pull of the bit and the prick of the spur. They were the Spanish Moors' horses, and they were brought into Mexico by Captain Cortez. One of the captain's men made a list of them: silver-gray mares, light and dark chestnut stallions, a cream-colored stallion, and a dun with black points. Some he described as being great racers, and some as fast, restless creatures unfit for war. Perhaps it was these restless spirits that little by little grazed further and further away from camp, and suddenly they were free. The Mustangs must have descended from them, for there were no horses in America when Cortez landed. Truant horses from later expeditions joined forces with the first runaways, and they all went adventuring together. In the New World, the New World was an ocean of grass that billowed on and on until the mountains put an end to it. Here was room to roam, to live like the true wild horse of Asia, the horses that had never been captured. As their numbers grew, they began traveling in bands, each headed by a king stallion, who was all-powerful. He marshaled his mares, moving them with the seasons to cool uplands in summer and warm valleys in winter. He ruled by might, driving and whiplashing his herd until even the little foals ran squealing at his command. But he was wise and brave, scenting danger from afar and protecting his family to the death. The Spanish invaders, meanwhile, did not miss the few horses that had strayed. They saw that the native Indians could drag great loads the native Indians could drag great loads, as much or more than the horses. They saw, too, that the Indians trembled and hid behind trees when the white conquistadors, no, the white conquerors, charged them on fiery steeds. Okay, we're going to take a look at these. Okay. The Spanish laughed inwardly, a fearful people they thought would make good slaves, and they made the Indians into pack animals, but the Indians' eyes were free. They soon discovered that the Spaniards and their horses were not one monster, half man and half horse. They came apart. The Indians watched how their masters mounted, and they tried forking their own legs over a horse. Riding was good. In the dark of night they began slipping away from the captors, galloping away with a new prize, a four-legged friend that went on the wings of the wind. Now, I do realize that in this one, this book is really old. I'm going to say this right now. And so they keep on referring to Indians as, the proper term is Native Americans, but I'm reading what's written. So don't take offense to that. When I say Indians, I do mean Native Americans, the proper term. I do apologize about that. I'm going to apologize on behalf of this book because it's really, really old. And it was before it was politically correct to call Indians Native Americans. So, anyways, where was I? Sorry. Okay. Years passed and more years, and the Indian began to count his wealth, not in pieces of gold as did the Spaniards, but in Mustangs. The more he had, the richer he was, and they were free for the taking. He had only to ride the range, round up a wild band, and cut out a particular bullet of horseflesh that struck his fancy. Sometimes he took all day, sometimes all week, but time for the Indian was not ticks and talks and alarm bells. He took time by the forelock, and he often did his horse. He was the master of both. The wild bands of Mustangs and Indian tribes loved liberty. Separately and together, they roved northwest and westward, finally accepting the west for their homeland. They belonged to the wild, open ranges, the blue mountains, and the paintbrush flowers. Piebalds and pintos were born into the solid-colored Mustangs, and their coats were color camouflage against canyon walls and desert bloom. When settlers began to move in on the range country, they called the Mustangs paint ponies or Indian ponies. Some of the settlers turned out to be as good roundup men as the Indian. They chased the wild bands of on horseback, caught a few fillies and colts, and left the others unharmed. It was these Mustangs that grew up to develop the West. They were the fast and enduring horses of the Pony Express, the cavalry horses, the cow ponies, the mounts of trader and trapper. But some were so wild and woolly they could never be tamed, and they became the bucking bronco of the Wild West shows. The moment a bronco felt the scissors grip of a cowboy's legs, it drove him mad. With cat-like contortions, he arched his spine, leaping, twisting into the air, and pitching his rider heels over head into the dust. These wild ones often ripped through barbed wire as if the stands were mere lace. Oh, if the strands were mere lace. Or plunging headlong to their death from high cliffs. They craved freedom more than grass or water, more than life. Even a Mustang broken to plow was often reverted to wildness. In the midst of cutting a furrow, he might suddenly break the traces and strike out for freedom, stopping only long enough to let out a great trumpeting neigh. At that commanding ring, gentle old work mares would kick up their heels and follow in joyous obedience. But these raw-boned work mares often lacked the fine heritage of the Mustang. Their blood diluted his until the colts and grand colts were regarded with scorn. Broomtails, they were called. So it is that many ranchers have little sympathy for today's Mustang, who may be a scrawny creature, but who still can fight his weight in wildcats. He fights only as a last resort, however. He prefers to outsmart his enemies, especially the puma, who preys on the newborn foals. The moment a stallion scents him, he sounds a warning whistle. Quicker than thought, the mares bunch the little ones completely encircle them, and turn their tails on the puma. There they stand motionless, scarcely breathing. The stallion, too, stands still as a rock, but ready to lash out. Seconds go by, and the puma slinks off, completely baffled. But there is one enemy Mustangs can't outsmart. It dives out of the sky, swoops down the mountainsides, roaring over the range, driving the horses hour after hour, giving them no time for a breather, no time to slake their thirst, no time for anything but to run until they can run no more. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a gate swings shut behind them, and they are trapped in a corral disguised with brush. Only then does the plane fly away, leaving the animals heaving and dripping sweat. The captured herds serve many purposes. Some of the horses are made into meat, some are used as rodeo buckets, and some are trained to be cow ponies. But always a few escape to be free again, to start life over. All of these enemies, flying cowboys, wild beasts, and rifles of men, the dwindling pastures too, are making the Mustang a vanishing American. But the Indians on their reservations are harboring the last of the wild horses. The government is willing to give the Indians sheep in place of their little Mustangs, but the Indians shake their heads, preferring to be blown along the pasture. Preferring to be blown along the plains rather, on a wild wind and a wild steed. When the long sleep comes, time enough. When the long sleep comes, time enough, they say, to look out on the clouds of sheep. Tourists in the West agree with the Indians. They are not satisfied just to view peaceful hillsides of sheep. They look for live mementos of frontier days. Children especially set their sights high. Indian buffaloes, wild horses. They stand on the brink of canyons, peering down the long reaches. Sometimes they see a shimmer. A shimmer of mist. And sometimes they see an outline of a paintbrush pony. Okay. It may be only a vision, but their imagination grows more and more vivid with their looking. But it may not be a vision at all. Look, a thin swirl of dust. The outline is free. What? Oh, the outline is free flowing. A little broomtail whisking up the rocky wall. A symbol of wildness right out of the past. A symbol of liberty of America itself. And that was the Mustang. In the next one, we will be reading about the Appaloosa and the quarter horse. And we are getting to the end here, to be honest. This has been the Album of Horses by Marguerite Henry, and it's illustrated by Wesley Dennis. As always, I thank everyone for watching and getting to this point in the video. If you like this content, make sure you like and subscribe, and that you ring the bell so you know when I upload. That being said, I appreciate any and all support. All that information will be in the description below. And as always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.